Hello, folks. Today is the 4th of November, 2022. And today we are going to talk about the spiritual significance of voting. And I realize I've got a pretty bad glare in my glasses here. I am borrowing someone's office, which is why it looks a little more stark than my own office normally does. I am in Virginia, very close to Washington, D.C. So it's interesting to be here right before the election, right before the 2022 election, November, I think it's the 8th, next Tuesday. So what I wanted to talk about today is the spiritual significance of voting. And I'll bet very, very few people listening to this now or listening after the recording is done have thought about the spiritual significance of voting. So what does spiritual ideas, spiritual concepts have to do with voting? Well, I'm going to first of all give you the easy answer, which is that everything we do is significant. Everything that we do impacts everything else. And when I'm not sure. I want to just check my sound here. Excuse me for this little glitch here. Okay, now I'm pretty sure that my sound is good. When we align ourselves with anything, when we align ourselves with a sports team, when we align ourselves with a school, when we align ourselves with a political party, when we align ourselves with a political figure, we literally are loaning our energy. We are adding our attention to that particular entity, whether it's a sports team or whether it is a political figure. And as such, we are aligning ourselves with their energy. Most of you have done some sort of manifestation work, and you know that part of what it takes to create your life the way that you want it is paying attention to how well you are lined up with the concepts of what it is that you are trying to create in your life, what you're trying to manifest, what you're literally trying to originate in your life. And in order to do that, you look at what your affiliations are, what words you speak on a regular basis, meaning every day, and you look at the people and the ideas that you align yourself with. If you align yourself with something that you would like people to see you as, but you don't really hold those concepts, but you're doing it because you want to look a certain way or you want to occur as being a certain way to other people, you are really out of alignment and all sorts of things happen. When we are out of alignment and we look one way, we appear to be one thing, but we express ourselves another way. The experience people have of us is that they don't trust us. When we don't keep our word, when we don't keep our alignment, people can feel that. They also can hear that in our language. And while we might think that we are making a good show, that we look like we're in alignment, and we aren't, people are picking that up. They're picking it up subtly, and they're picking it up observationally as well. They might not be able to put their finger on why something doesn't feel quite right, but when we are out of alignment with what we truly, truly believe, when we are aligning ourselves in the world with a sports team, with a school, with an idea, with what we say we are going to do, and we're not really that inside, there's a disconnect. There's a dissonance that people pick up. So we're going to start with that premise. And I'm going to talk about this in fairly vague terms. And if anybody has any questions, if anybody has any ideas, if anybody has any stories, or you want to challenge me about this, I welcome you to just put your comment um, in the comment section, and I'll pay attention there, and would be happy to answer them. So at this point in time, 2022, we're at probably one of the most divisive times in our history, probably since the Second World War. There are many people, many journalists, old-time journalists, many historians who are saying that there is so much divisiveness throughout the world, within so many countries. And we haven't seen this much divisiveness since right before World War II was started. And some people think that this is a precursor to even more eruptions. Today, I think it was, South Korea had 180 warplanes in the skies around South Korea. South Korea scrambled jets to meet that threat. And so we have the Ukraine issue going on. We have Ukraine being invaded by Russia. We have other smaller skirmishes going on around the world. Those are the biggest ones right now today that I'm aware of. So we do have physical activity that one might say are war moves that are happening in the world. And we also have a lot happening politically. We're what, I think 5 days before the midterm elections. And there is so much rancor between the political parties. And instead of political candidates talking about what they believe in, instead of political candidates talking about what they're going to do once they get into the office, we have political candidates doing little more except bashing the other candidate, and quite often putting forth information that is not true, basically fake news. And so what does a person do when we're in the middle of what looks like precursor to conflict, literally throughout the world? And we're in the midterm election cycle right now, and we don't know how to find clear information. We don't know who to believe. We just feel like whatever we do is not going to make a difference. There also is the difficulty within the United States of, in so many places, the ability to vote feels like it's being threatened, feels like it is really being made, the freedom to vote is being restricted somewhat. And people are having that experience. And there's a lot of fear around the actual act of voting. There are some places around the country where people in military gear have been allowed to be at the early voting drop-off places. And it's very scary to those people who come. And I really commend those who are voting anyway, who are dropping their ballots in the box, who are not being intimidated by those threatening characters at the ballot boxes. I commend them for standing in their courage and voting anyway. So what is the spiritual significance of voting? Those of you who have listened to other Facebook Fridays have heard me talk about spiritual being about integrity. That when I talk about spiritual issues, we're talking about higher vibrational issues. We're talking about keeping our word. We're talking about being clear about what we're following and telling the truth. We're talking about having clear relationships with other people. And we're also talking about doing our work so that when we are threatened or when we feel out of alignment, we get ourselves back into alignment as quickly as possible. Some people use a religion and religious procedures to do this. Others who are not aligned with religion might use meditation, might use yoga or other martial arts to quiet themselves inside, to get centered, to bring themselves back to a stasis, to a peaceful place, so that they can then go forward. And so, how does voting factor in here? Well, voting is really a very outward signal of our alignment. When we vote, we align ourselves with the person for whom we have voted. When we vote, we align ourselves for the idea we have voted for. Sometimes there are a referendum on the ballot. And when we vote yes or no for those referenda, we are aligning ourselves with that idea, with that concept, with that decision. And so when we literally vote for a candidate, we are aligning ourselves with that person's values. And many, many people who have not grown up in families where they have learned how to follow politics in a way so that they can understand what candidates stand for, what the parties themselves are espousing, regardless of what party it is. And those who have not had good education either are sort of lost many times. They depend on their friends, they depend on a particular newscast, and there are many people who have just one news program, really newscast or news program on all day long in their homes and sometimes even at work. When you do that, you're not hearing other opinions, you're hearing one opinion. If the values, in other words, if the beliefs, if the story about what is true with those newscasts aligns with what you think is true, then you're okay. If you're not sure and you're only watching one newscast to find out who you should vote for, what's really going on in the world, you're really limiting yourself, and you're possibly aligning with yourself, aligning yourself with someone and some ideas that may not truly be what you believe. If there is one particular news source or source for information around election information that over the decades has been very central, very unbiased, it is that information put out by the League of Women Voters. So League of Women Voters have taken it on themselves to make sure that information about all candidates is put forth in a neutral way so that people can make their choice without being swayed by propaganda. And if you go to the League of Women Voters website and look for the area in which you vote, look for your municipality, would probably be the easiest way to find it. You'll be able to find what districts you are in for each of the different levels of voting. If you're voting locally, that will be one district. If you're voting for if you're voting for a state senator or a state representative, that would be another district. If you're voting for a senator from your state that goes to Washington, that would be your U.S. senator. If you're voting for your representative who goes to Washington, that would be your U.S. representative. And those people also have different districts. And so it gets a little confusing because you think, well, I live in one place, everything would be the same district. But because each of the candidates handles or stands for a different geographical area and a different number of people within the state, those districts are all individually numbered, and it gets very confusing. So going to the League of Women Voters will help you find information on the candidates. If you really don't know who your candidates are, you can go to your state congressional website. If you are voting on the national level, you can go to the US Representative or US Senate websites and find out the name of, or the number of your district. Again, I think the League of Women Voters also has links to find that information. So I wanted to make sure to cover how to find that information if you really don't know. If you really have not done your homework, please listen to more than one news source. Listen to a news source that is as close to neutral as possible. Again, I really highly suggest that you track down the League of Women Voters online. So let's take this a little bit further. If anybody has, I see that we have a number of people here listening. If you have any questions, I would really love to hear them, read them, and consider them, try and answer them. If you have any comments for me, if you want to challenge what I've been saying, I encourage you also to put that in the comment section, and I'll read it and we can address it right here. So let's go to a little bit more esoteric aspect of voting. When we make a statement that we are in support of a particular policy or of a particular candidate, we literally, as I said before, are aligning our energy with that idea, with that candidate, which is why for each of us, it's really important to know first what we believe in, what we think is true, what we feel is true, where we stand on particular issues, where we stand on the broader issues as well. I know that in the last number of election cycles, many people have become one-issue voters. I have people in my own family who are very staunch one-issue voters. I have one sibling who is very staunchly aligned to a particular aspect of abortion and only votes according to where the candidate stands on the abortion issue. They are he and, excuse me, I am sort of identifying somebody here, but that sibling and their spouse are very staunchly against abortion. And so regardless of what other aspects a particular candidate is supporting or not supporting, this sibling and the spouse will only vote on that candidate's stance on abortion. I also have other relatives who have the same kind of stance as far as gun control is concerned. And their stance is that they are anti-gun control of any kind. And no matter where their candidate, no matter where the candidate stands on anything else, they will only vote for the candidate who is most aligned with being against any kind of gun control whatsoever. Now, I don't particularly agree with either of those two stances, but I support my siblings and my other relatives in voting how they feel is right for them and in helping them get information so that they can find out where each of the candidates stands on these issues. For me, it's important that people feel that they are voting in alignment with themselves rather than looking good, rather than guessing. And so regardless of where someone else stands, I'm always supportive of helping them get the information that they need, not to try and convince them that their beliefs are wrong, not to try and convince them that someone else is right. Where people stand is a very private issue, and when we feel that someone should not vote a particular way because they are voting wrong, we are actually creating more tangle, more confusion to the issue. When we are trying to stop people from voting a particular way, we literally are pushing against the very energy that we want to stop. And in doing so, we are giving it more energy. So I'm going to use the gun control issue. If we are anti-gun control and we want to vote for the candidate who also has that stance, but our sibling is pushing against us to try and stop us from voting for that candidate who is against gun control, not only does that candidate have my attention and my strength and my energy supporting them, that candidate also has my sibling energy pushing against me. And so my sibling, who does not want me to vote for the candidate against gun control, is pushing against me. And so that candidate also has my sibling's energy. Now, I've repeated myself because this gets a little confusing. The things that we push against, we are literally giving our energy to. We are literally giving our attention to. And as such, are supporting that very thing that we might be against and we are pushing against to stop. So then what do? How do we deal with this in a way that is productive? How can we make a difference? How can we help people understand that there are different issues? When we have, let me just listen here for a moment here. They want me to present things a certain way. When we are embroiled in issues that we are against, that we do not want to see happen in the world, the very best thing that we can do is take a neutral stance about that issue and put all of the energy possible for another way, not against the issue we don't want to see, but to be for another issue. This is very subtle. It can get very, very subtle. But this is where the power is, that we not push against something, that we literally pull for something. So if you are against gun control, you would rather take a stance to be for freedom. And I do not take that stance. Let me just shift this around. That was a good example to use around adding your energy to, but it's not where I myself stand. So I'm going to choose a viewpoint here that I am in alignment with. I'm in alignment with people having the freedom to vote without any intimidation. I am in alignment with people having the ability to vote early and safely with very little convolution. In other words, it should be easy for them to get their vote to the particular, to the appropriate office, to the appropriate drop-off place, without intimidation and without a lot of restriction. And so instead of pushing against restriction, instead of pushing against any kind of intimidation, I am very much for the freedom of voting and freedom of easy access for those who are voting. Can you see the difference between the stances there? When you align yourself with a principle for something, you have much more power than you do when you are pushing against an issue. And I see that we have a number of people on here. Any of you have questions or any of you have comments? Do you agree with what I said? Do you disagree with what I said? Am I clear on what I've been saying? Do you understand the significance here? So even though I took as my focus today the spiritual aspects of voting, this is really about the spiritual aspects of what we align ourselves with in the world. How we align ourselves also strengthens our energy or weakens our energy and our ability to be effective in how we want to create the world, how we want to experience the world. And the more that we know ourselves, what we value, and what we are aligning ourselves with, the more power we have to make change when we want to see things changed in the world. So let me talk a little bit now about knowing what our values are and how that impacts us, and the spiritual aspects of voting. When we really know what our values are, and values are, I've said some of them already: freedom, peace, cooperation, alignment. Um, One of my biggest values is that everyone needs to win. Um, None of us really win unless everyone is taken care of. And this is not necessarily everyone getting their own way, it's basically everyone being cared for. Some of the other values that you might have are independence. You might have, some of you might have the values of gun control is important, minimizing the availability of weaponry. Some of you might have of the value of being able to carry a loaded weapon at all times. And because for your own reasons, number one, to feel safe, etc. And so when you really know what it is that you align yourself with, it's much easier and you are more powerful in your alignment. So how do you really find out what it is you believe? You might think that you are aware of what it is that you believe. But I'll bet if you have not already done this exercise and you sit down and write a list of what your values are of what's important to you in the world, you're going to be surprised. You might get to at least 3, at least 5, maybe even 7, maybe even 9 or 10 things that you truly believe in the world. You believe what's true, you believe what should happen, you believe what you stand for. But I'll bet a lot of you can't get much further than 5 and be really clear. One of the things that is always a fun exercise is to go online and Google list of values, and then go through the list of words that are there and look at the different values that are in that list. I think there's a standard list of about 50, maybe 50 or 60 values that are most common. And you are going to be surprised at some of the things that you see there. And you might be surprised that you're triggered by some of these things, either positively or negatively. And if you haven't ever done a values list for yourself, or if you haven't updated your values list in the last 5 years, I encourage you to play with these ideas. And to go to a list and start doing the work of asking yourself, what is it I truly believe in? Chris Anderson just came online and said, so are we creating the violent incidents that have occurred in the past few weeks by aligning our energy with various candidates? Chris, it's not that clear. It's not that simple. Right now in the world, we are in the energy of transformation in the world on almost all levels, on the personal level, on the family level, on the community level, on our municipal level, on state levels, on country levels, on even on collaborative community levels that happen at the country level. The United States has allies, Russia has allies, even North Korea has allies. So there is a lot that is coming apart right now. A lot of old values that have been held within humanity for eons. The strongest of which is that might makes right. That is coming apart. It literally, that value, that pattern in the world, that pattern within humanity's expression is literally coming apart right now. So, where do you align yourself? And is how you align yourself helping create the violent incidents? Here we get to a personal level, Chris. If you feel very, very strongly that that people should have freedom to vote, let's just talk about this. That people should have the freedom to vote. And you also hold personally the value of peaceful interaction. In other words, when you're angry at someone, you don't necessarily have a shouting match with them to convince them they're wrong and that you're right, and that nothing else is acceptable. That would be more of a violent, of the value of violence. Violence is the way to get what you want to come true. Violence is the way to get your way in the world. Violence, if you think that violence is an acceptable action when things don't go your way, then you hold the value of violence. But if you hold the value of peace, peaceful interactions, and you feel that there should be freedom, then what you are doing literally is you are aligning your peaceful collaboration energy with the value of freedom, and it creates a larger space. The vibrational rate of freedom is very high. The vibrational rate of peace is also very high. The vibrational rate of violence is extremely low. And so when you hold that large vibration, you are impacting the entire issue. Now, that doesn't mean that freedom can be obtained, that if everybody had that high vibration, everybody who held the idea of peaceful collaboration and held the ideal of freedom, that we would have peace, because we do have people who hold literally the opposite as values. And so there would be some kind of conflict, I'm sure, if regardless of where this clash of values is showing up. If it was showing up on a playground, that's one thing. If it were showing up in the city hall, that's another. If it were showing up on the border of North and South Korea, that's another. If it were showing up on the borders of the Ukraine right now, that's another. One of the things that I learned when I was in a fairly large business argument with someone, I took the high road, and I felt comfortable taking the high road. And I held that I was going to take the high road and be kind, and I was going to hold my ideal of collaboration. The other party did not hold those ideals, and the other party literally waged an emotional and financial war against me. And one of the things that I learned the hard way, and then later on came to find this in spiritual teachings, is that as a person of peace, as a person who really holds peace and good for all as part of our highest ideals, if someone wages war against us, it doesn't necessarily mean that we were wrong. What it means is that we are responsible to meet the threat to our family, meet the threat to our businesses, meet the threat to our community, meet the threat to our state, or even to our country. Our obligation is to meet that threat and try and minimize that threat as fast as possible with as little collateral damage as possible. So this is not necessarily always talked about, but if we are a peaceful people, If we are a peaceful personage and we really hold the ideal that there should be freedom from all, freedom for all, and that we should govern in peaceful ways, we may have some cleaning up to do before we actually have the freedom to govern in peaceful ways. What's happening right now on the national and at the state and at the local levels within the United States is really challenging all of that. We have so many candidates who feel that whatever they want, they can have by whatever means possible. Now, that's a fairly low vibrational concept because it does not engender peace. It does not care for everyone. It does not respect boundaries of others. It does not respect boundaries or decisions that have been agreed upon in the past. When you have someone who does not respect the other party, then you have a low vibrational conflict with that person, from that person, with that person. And if you really take on that you are about creating peace in the world and that this person is disturbing your peace, then it is your job to make sure that this changes as fast as possible, again, with as little collateral damage. We can use as another example of this eminent domain, which is basically your home. Your home is, you have the legal right to defend your home against intruders, and you have the right to defend yourself against attack. Now, the way that these laws are worded is different all over the country, at the state level and at the very local levels. So I'm not going to quote any of those, but we have the right. We have the right to protect ourselves and our family and our home. And if someone comes into our home and feels like they have the right to take what they want, to hurt us in order to take what they want, we have the right to fight against them. And there is the biggest example of how our work is to thwart this intruder as fast and as hard as possible with as little collateral damage. Chris, I'm curious if that answered your question, or if you still have some concerns about that. I just want to come back to Chris's question. Are we creating the violent incidents? Some people have a lot of confusion about creating our own reality. That's one statement. Creating our own reality. Manifestation is another way that this is described. I prefer to use the phrase creating our experience. When we take responsibility for creating our experience, we might be in the middle of conflict, but we create our experience to feel empowered, regardless of what's going on. We don't create our experience of being disempowered. We might be afraid, and we can choose to be afraid, or we can choose to be powerful and focused on the outcome rather than focused on what might happen to us. Chris says yes and no, but it's a far bigger discussion than voting. I don't know if it is a far bigger discussion than voting, because voting is taking a stance and aligning our energy with what we believe in. And if we are aligning our energy with what we truly believe in, and we are working to manifest that in the world, if we are working to give ourselves a particular kind of experience, then we have to be careful what we align our energy with. And if we are looking at the violent incidents that are going out there, that are going on out there, there are more people involved than just ourselves. The experience that we have in the midst of a violent incident, or when we're watching a violent incident on the media, we can choose to be afraid. We can choose to condemn that. We can choose to be neutral. We can choose to take the highest stance around that. If there is nothing that we can do physically to change what is going on, and we are just observers, the most powerful thing that you can do is align yourself with love and look on the incident with love and look on the incident with compassion for the people and the entities involved, and pray that the outcome is for the best of all concerned. We do not know. I'm going to use the word karma, which I rarely use, but it's something that people understand. We do not know the karma. We do not know the mindsets of the people involved in any particular incident. We don't know, nor could we really understand at a spiritual level what's going on there, what patterns are being broken, what patterns are being challenged, what patterns are really coming to the forefront. When the invasion of Ukraine by Russia started back in May, how many of us thought that that particular invasion was going to be going on here at the beginning of November in the same year? So that's what? It's really almost 5 months worth. 5 months worth of fighting has been going on. And in the beginning, most of us probably would have sided with Ukraine, but thought that Ukraine would just come in and take over, that Russia would just come in and take over Ukraine. That didn't happen the way that people expected it to. And the people of Ukraine have been fighting back and have been answering that invasion in ways that so many people would never have thought possible. Where do you think the people of Ukraine are aligning their energy? They are aligning their energy with others who are fighters, who are winners, who will not stop in saving their homeland for invasion any more than you and I would stop trying to save our house from being invaded and burgled. And so those people have really given us a role model for how to align ourselves with success, with doing whatever it takes to save ourselves. They are giving us an amazing example of courage and integrity in times of terror, times of great lack of resources, and they're going forward. This skirmish that's going on, it isn't really a skirmish, it's a war between Russia and Ukraine, with Russia trying to invade Ukraine. This will be in the storybooks for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, because the people of Ukraine are standing firm in their intention that they will be free, that they will not be taken over by Russia, and that this is their home, and that Russia is intruding and will be pushed out. And they will do everything that it takes, including sacrificing their lives for that. So, Chris, do you have any other questions about the spiritual energy of voting? We have a number of other people here too. I'm curious what you think about all of this. Have you ever thought about the spiritual aspects of voting? Have you thought about the spiritual aspects of politics? I'd like to talk about that for just a few minutes. We've got about 15 minutes more here before the bottom of the hour. And I am the president of my village council. I call myself the mayor because that's what people understand. Basically, I'm the head of the governing body of my little village where I live. It's small. Our school system is 4,000 people. The village itself is, I think, about 1,660 some. Very small village, but the village itself serves the larger school system. It also is a tourist attraction, has a number of, it's a tourist draw to the area, and we also have a number of very highbrow tourist attractions within our larger area. So we have a lot of people coming and going. And I am, I didn't necessarily want, I didn't set out to be the village president. Listen to me stumble about it. I didn't set out to do that. I've been serving on the village board about 6 years when the president retired, and no one else had stepped forward. And I had heard the call. I had heard my guide say, "This is your job for a while. This is your job. Your background is perfect for what will be coming forward in the village, some of the projects that are going on, some of the needs, and some of the transformations that are happening." That I had some unique background and could help at the time. And so I stepped forward. I stepped forward into the job. As quite often happens when you're called to do something, it's usually something you don't really want to do. And I'm sure that most of you who are listening to this or will be listening after the recording, you've had this experience. You know when you've been called to something. You may have answered that call. You may have said, "Nope, this is not for me." And then afterwards realized that you had been called and you said no. And then dealt with those ramifications. Well, in this case, I did say yes. And so I have been pondering the spiritual aspect of serving in politics. Most people in the United States these days really are a little bit intimidated by the political systems that are available at this time. They're intimidated and appalled by some of the personalities who have been involved, and particularly have particular consternation about some of the decisions that have been made at the Supreme Court level, at the state level, and at the national level, if not also the local levels. And my mother-in-law was also a Politico, a wonderful woman. She was the first woman who was head of her county board. And as such, she was a role model for me when I met her in later years. And she talked a lot about leadership and about leading people. And when we involve ourselves in politics, whether it's running for a Chamber of Commerce, being on the board of the Chamber of Commerce, or of the school board, or of your village board, or of your city council, or if you're running for a state or county board, or if you're running for state office, we all have a responsibility to those people that we are going to be governing. And as such, we are offering ourselves as not just as a leader, but also role models in aligning ourselves with values for the area that we are governing. At the lower level, it's a whole lot more. It's a whole lot easier to see what the issues are than sometimes it is to understand all of the ramifications at the higher levels when we are not in the office. But when we are in an office, we are really faced with so many other issues that those who are not in the offices don't really understand, impact all of the decisions that go into our work at those particular levels, all the way up. And so probably one of the most supportive things that we can do for all of our politicians is to get to understand what the issues are. And I don't mean just listening to news reports about these issues, but talking to people on the other side of what your opinion is, talking to those who have been in office and asking them what their experiences are and what their concerns are, and how, if this is someone that you are aligned with, that you can support them. This is a spiritual support. This is the level of aligning yourself with someone who is in a position of power and can get things done. And if the person who is in that position of power is someone that you do not agree with, letting them know that you have a dissenting view, letting them know what you would rather see happen in um, what else you would like to see happen. When you do this without haranguing them, without calling them names, without saying that they're wrong, but by making your points clear and giving suggestions for alternatives, that is positive spiritual support for your values. And it also is positive spiritual support for those who will support your values in office, even if that person in office right now is not supporting your values. So any other questions here? I'm going to be signing off in just a minute or two, unless we have something else here. So folks, I want to sign off by saying, regardless of where you stand on the issues, getting out to vote, if you have not already voted early, getting out to vote next Tuesday is so very, very important. You are aligning yourself. Oh, I'm sorry. I've probably got a fire alarm. Then my daughter is just changing the batteries in. So get out to vote next Tuesday. Align yourself with the values that you believe in and give solid, positive support to those values. We're in a huge transition politically. We're in a huge transition energetically. And the time is now. We can't sit on our hands. We can't sit back and let someone else do that work. Each of us is being called to align ourselves with our own values and see that those values are expressed in the world. Love to you all who have joined me today. And for those of you who will be watching and listening after the recording is done. I'll be back here next Friday. Next Friday, I'll go back to my normal time, which is normally 9 o'clock Central Time. I haven't yet decided on what the I haven't yet decided on what the topic is, but I will put that up in the next couple days. Thank you, folks. I wish you a good weekend and happy voting.